different than our experience yesterday in the bar.
That was a lot of fun, too. We were in the Standard Tap. Shouts to William, one of Philadelphia's original brewers back when Sam Adams had a brew house here. And William's gone on to be one of the great evangelists for craft in this city. And he hosted us for our video thing.
And I convinced you somehow magically to drink from the Lord Chesterfield tap, straight from the tap.
Right out of the tap. They're going to want to check that tap.
Yeah.
Put my lips against the Chesterfield tap.
So we got about 30 minutes here with Sam to chat about Dogfish Head and your business and what's on the horizon, what you guys are up to. So let's just kind of catch up. What's the latest? How's the Dogfish Head business this year? I know you guys were a little bit slower in 2015, but how are things looking almost midway?
Really good. I mean, last year, it was a wonderful year in that we did have a sense of humility about it. We made a choice going into 15 that we were going to take some really methodical steps when it came to finding the right people to fill some really important seats in our company. And also when it came to looking at our pricing structure, when it came to looking at our distribution network. 2015 was really just a year of a sort of thoughtful internal reflection. Thankfully, a few years before that, we did a lot of the back of the house stuff of building the capacity that we needed to, once we had the right butts in the right seat, once we had the right people in the right positions and the right sales structure and plan, we could accelerate growth again. So I think last year was our first single-digit year of growth in about 18 years. That said, it was intentional, and it was a year where we didn't do any discounting to get growth. We didn't open any new states, so we're still certainly proud of that year. But we're really, really excited about the future. Some members of our leadership team are in the room in the last few days. We've had tons of great meetings with our distributors and about really staying true to our mission and being sort of tip of the tip. And, we were selling, when we first started bottling our beers in 90, opened in 95 and started packaging really in earnest in 97. Our three beers that we went to market with were Chicory Stout with coffee, chicory, licorice root. Yep. It had St. Johnswort in it until the federal government said we couldn't make an antidepressant depressant. So we took the St. John's wort out. And then our third year-round beer was, Immort Ale, a $16 six-pack, 11% alcohol, wood-aged maple syrup beer in 1996. And so we those were our workhorses along with April Hop and Raison d'Etre that we made it through the first shakeout of the late 90s with, without dumbing down our beers, without discounting our beers, and it wasn't easy. Mariah and I ate at our pub most nights because we couldn't afford groceries, but we got through it, and we realized this is another competitive moment, and now what's awesome is there's so many other leaders next to us ready to help us move through this competitive moment. We're looking forward to it.
Right. You could just hire a brewer named like St. John and just call it St. John's Wort.
You should have done that, especially one that had weird things sticking out of his neck and nose and stuff.
Yeah, there you go.
St. John's Worts.
Oh. All right. On that note,
don't go to David's Joker. That's getting really weird.
Yeah. No more giant trouser monsters or whatever. Anyways, so the decision to kind of reflect and take some time in 2015 to really hone in on what you guys wanted to accomplish, was that an active choice for you guys, or did something trigger that? Was there something else that caused you to say, hey, we really need to kind of look inside and reflect here?
I'd say it's a combination of the both. Two things that I think we definitely own and could have done a better job of is the timeline of hiring a VP of sales, and we wanted to find the perfect one. I'm glad we waited to get Todd and his experience into that seat, but going 10 months without a person in that seat was not the best for our distributors, and we've done the apologies that we deserve to do for that, but we're super psyched that we got the right person, and we flew tons of people in and just didn't feel right. So we're glad we waited on that, and frankly, the other decision I think that we waited too long on was revamping our packaging, which You know, when we started focusing, came up with the concept of continual hopping IPAs in the late '90s. IPAs was not the hot style in America. You know, in that era, it was ambers and seasonals and pale ales. So we didn't put IPA anywhere big on our packaging. It was always super tiny, and we had a lot of copy to describe what was differentiated about continual hopping, but no real call-outs. And then if you looked across our whole portfolio, no real continuity of where the Shark and Shield was, and you know, the call-out of the brands. So that was a little too long in coming as well. The other stuff, though, was super intentional. You know, and I think we'll talk a lot more about pricing and the high end of beer on our next panel, so not to talk too much about that now. You know, it feels good to be an underdog again. You know, we got into this business, you know, we were the smallest commercial brewery in the country in '95, a half-barrel brew house. And when you're that small, you're obviously competing in the context of an industry full of Goliaths. And so it's not so much figuring out what you're going to stand for, it's going to be figuring out what you stand against, because there's massive things that stand for something that came before you.
Right.
And so for us, it was the Rheinheitsgebot, which was galvanizing. When I learned about that law as a homebrewer, I'm like, fuck yeah, that's us. We're going to stand against that. And day one, when we opened as the smallest brewery, the majority of our beers were brewed outside the Rheinheitsgebot. And today, the majority of beers are brewed outside the Rheinheitsgebot. But for the first 10 years, we were, you know, barely profitable, grew, but always, like the last guys up here said, super capital-intensive industry, and grew slowly but surely. And then after about 10 years, we became an overnight success. You know, Rob Todd, we're about the same era, '95. He tells a story of talking to like a startup brewer in Maine a couple of years ago, and they're like, yeah, you know, we're gonna just grow very methodically in grassroots. We're not gonna be an overnight success like Dogfish Head. And Rob's like, I kind of stood next to Sam for a few years when they were not an overnight success. So it's kind of nice now that our model is back to being one that's frankly relatively challenging compared to some other models, you know, of top 50 craft breweries. And our growth trends are a little challenging because we've chosen this model about really focusing on the high end and differentiating what we're doing on a liquid stream and price point stream. It's kind of nice to be the underdog again.
So you're an underdog within craft, or just within the whole larger segment of beer?
No, I'm mostly in that context talking about the larger segment of beer.
Because you're certainly, you know, you're in the top 15. You know, you're a large craft brewer, and I think, you know, a lot of small craft brewers wouldn't see you necessarily as an underdog. But that's how you guys are viewing yourselves, at least internally.
And I think externally as well. It's, you know, and again, just going to the context of sometimes you're 6 million barrels as the line of small in the Brewers Association's definition. That sounds big to almost anyone.
Right.
Except when you say that's about 2 or 3% market share, and except when you say the biggest American-owned breweries have about 1% or 2% market share. Then it reminds us that we're all Davids in this.
Right. You talked a little bit about you know, some of the decisions that you guys made last year and some of the changes that you made. You know, I think one of the things that might have caught some people by surprise was the decision to sell a minority stake to LNK, and we're coming up on about 7 months, I think, since that was announced. I guess, can you talk a little bit about your motivation to explore selling that minority stake, and kind of what the long-term goals are and plans are for that whole thing?
Yeah, sure. So our structures, we've always been a family company. You know, Mariah and I started this in '95, but since our inception, we've always been a company with minority equity holders. Originally, it was my dad, my orthodontist. He's my Uncle Arnie, my Jewish uncle, my dad's best friend, who I call Uncle Arnie. He's my orthodontist. And then this guy I built stone walls for as my summer job, and he put in 50, my dad put in 25, and my Uncle Arnie put in more than my dad, 35. My dad's a cheap bastard, I guess. But at different moments, including Mariah's dad, who's an amazing entrepreneur mentor as well, different people put in money in our company. They had board seats on our company. They were amazing mentors and taught us so much, and every one of them left making a premium on their money. So when we saw the landscape changing at a rate that we hadn't seen it in our first 18, 19 years of business. I sat down with Mariah and I sat down with Nick and said, hey, we're getting all these calls, we've never taken them in the past, but we should probably just take them and hear what's happening and what else is going to be changing, since this is our industry and we want to understand as the landscape's changing what some of these deals that are happening really mean. And for us, we saw as an opportunity was, we knew we wanted to stay in the definition of craft, because for me it's the only line in the sand that this industry has. And everyone can say all day long, it's a subjective thing on what you think about that line, but it at least is the line that is there. So for us it was always about, let's talk to some folks, but we're only going to take these meetings. But this one group had a level of experience with other high-end industries, from Calvin Klein to Levi's, another family-owned company, and across the board, and really impressed us. And when they understood we were never interested in selling more than 15%, and that it was our primary goal that when, like my dad or Mariah's dad, when we'd learn from them, they were going to leave, make some money, but our goal wasn't to head towards an IPO or to head towards selling out to a massive, big, conglomerate brewery. And they're still like, hell yeah, but we love your brand, and we think we can help you guys navigate this, and we know what your goals are. We're like, this could be a good fit. And really the biggest thing for me was that first era that I mentioned we barely lived through, and we had to take all the profits from our restaurant brewery and shovel them over to our production brewery in the late 90s just to not go bankrupt. When we were making choices like that, pretty much everyone to the left and right of us, as I looked at us all charging that hill, and you saw Kenny Grossman charging over there and Carol Stout charging over there, we all looked alike. We were all these beer-passionate people first and business people passionate second, and a lot of us got taken out and didn't make it, but so many of us did. And then as we were taking these meetings and hearing so much about the change in our industry, you kind of saw, looking your left and right, it wasn't all the same kinds of people anymore. There were not all beer geek brewers running these major breweries. And we thought, well, maybe this is the right time to have somebody that comes from industries with massive players that understands that competitive moment, that can be an awesome voice on our board. But Mariah and I all day long could say that, thanks for that thing, we like that thing, or Nick can say, yeah, we like that, or Cindy can say that. And we don't have to take anything. Mariah and I still have control and voting control of Dogfish. But to have them there as a resource that have seen similar industries has been really powerful.
So, two questions. What's their motivation for wanting to invest then? As a private equity firm, I mean, it is a bit non-traditional to do a minority deal like that. And two, I mean, what was the motivation for you beyond just wanting to have them as a resource? How are you deploying that capital? Was it to pay down debt from the expansion? Is it to do some hiring, like some of the other guys on the panel just before us said, hey, you got to have salespeople? I mean, what's the capital being used for, and what's their motivation?
So the main reason that we decided to move forward and have them join us was to compress time. The amount of resources that they have, from analysts to just a Rolodex full of consultants in the kinds of industries, from real estate vetting to hiring of executive level people, just helped us compress and collapse time. We asked the same thing when we put all of these barriers, like, we're not going to be interested in anything more than a 15% investment. We're not heading towards an IPA. At a certain point, like, so exactly why do you want to do this? It was basically, they said, we believe in a leadership team and we believe in the brand. And we believe that we can help you grow, and we believe if that happens, we will get a fair return by helping you grow. And then the other component of your question that I'm not skirting is, we did get income from that deal, from selling that 15%. But again, knowing that our primary goal is to have them in for a number of years, glean as much knowledge of them as we can as we navigate this challenging competitive moment in the industry, and hopefully come out on the other side stronger than we went in. They're going to deserve that premium if they help us do what we all collectively think they can. So frankly, most of that money's just sitting somewhere very dry, because we're very lucky, and I got to thank Nick, who's financially a tremendous leader at our company. We built that brewery and spent $52 million. We have 600,000 barrels in the ground in beautiful coastal Delaware. And we did it and came out of it at just over a 1 leverage rate. We can pay off all our debt in less than 2 years. So even talking to our main banking partners out of this neck of the woods, Citizen Bank, who have been awesome to us, we know there's going to be a moment in the future when we're going to ask L&K that, hey, we learned a lot from you, but we'd like to keep going as a family and move this thing forward. That even if that moment we're in a place where Citizens we're a little tapped out, pretty much everything that we took this first round in will still be dry for us to, Mariah and I personally use to just put it back in and make sure we keep going the family way.
Got it. How realistic of a model is that for others in the space? Do you see this as, a viable option for other brewers that might be looking to, I guess, retain their BA craft independence or BA-defined craft independence and still bring in, a savvy financial partner?
Yeah, I think everyone's palate's different, appetite for risk. Literally, that's why there's thousands of awesome beers. Everyone's physical palate's different, but it's why you're starting to see thousands of different versions of deals come together, as diverse as the beers that we make. And as Rob Todd said today, while we are losing a few folks every year to our definition, we're getting hundreds and hundreds that are staying within our definition. And I think if we as a community of indie craft brewers just stay super focused on quality, consistency, and being well differentiated, that scale is not as important as that opportunity, and scale isn't, for me personally, as important as the opportunity to wake up and be in control of your own destiny. And I do think, as much as lately craft beer is a cool thing, it's going to have a moment when it's not a cool thing anymore. We've lived through that. And the people that get into it for that don't let the tail of money wag the dog of inspiration, they'll find the right way forward. I'm not worried about that. But the thing that really almost derailed us in the late 90s was a bunch of folks that were more passionate about making money than making beer got into the industry. Quality, consistency, and being well differentiated got kind of muddy, and it affected the overall reputation of indie craft. So I think if we're all focused on those things, there's going to be tons of different models of how to run a successful brewery.
Right. And taking that question one step further, how do you think all of the M&A activity, all of the M&A activity is altering the sort of competitive landscape of craft? What are sort of the, I guess, positive and negative arguments of all of these investments and some of the buyouts as well?
We're going to talk about beer anytime soon.
We'll get through it.
All right. So on the last financial question of the panel, Chris, is it altering the universe? Of course it is. And this isn't the first era. I mean, we deals have been made for 20-something years, from the early Kona Red Hook deals to Sam Adams going public. And so it's just economic Darwinisms. This industry's at this tipping point. It's not a moment that's going to last forever. I imagine there's probably you're talking to an English major about M&A activity.
You said you just went through this process and took all these phone calls and met with them. You must have learned a lot.
No, I did, and I enjoyed it, and I enjoyed the process, and I learned so much about our industry and their industries as well. But yes, I do think the landscape has changed, and I'll just say everyone's journey is different. But for me now more than ever, the definition of an indie craft brewery is existentially, I think, important for the diversity and viability of small breweries across our country.
All right, you wanted to talk about beer.
Yeah, let's do that.
All right, let's talk about some beer then. Let's do sort of a little bit of a rapid fire here on some trends that we're noticing. These fruit-forward IPAs. We're seeing a lot of activity around citrus, specifically in the IPA category. Do you love it? Do you hate it? Do you think it's here to stay? Why are so many brewers exploring in this flavor realm?
Yeah, and I'm doing a panel with Benj in Chicago in a few weeks with my buddies Bill Kovaleski from Awesome Victory locally down the road, and my buddy Greg from Stone, talking a bit of trends in craft beer world.
And you all have citrus forward. beers as
We
well.
we do, and so yeah, I mean when we opened in '95, Shelter, Chicory, Immortale, Pumpkin Ale, but '96 was the first year we said, hey, I do like, because my first beer I fell in love with was Celebration from Sierra after drinking cheap beer forever, but I worked at a beer bar, had Celebration in Chimay in 1 week, and that made me go on this path. And so I loved hoppy beers, but I wanted to find a non-Reinheitsgebot way into doing them, and playing around in that era with the great citrusy, cascadey hops from the Northwest. In '96, we started doing April hop, which I think might have been the first packaged and distributed fruit-infused IPA in '96. And we've done a ton of them since then. We did our Hellhound, our lemon peel and lemon flesh infused IPA starting about 8 or 9 years ago. So we obviously are biased and we love the category, but in the research that whether it's BART or IRI, and everyone's asking what's after IPA, right? Because there's never been a single impressive in terms of market share style moment in the history of our industry, even counting Sierra Pale Ale from 80 on, that made an impact, an actual dent on market share to the extent IPA has in the last 5 years. So when people ask what's after IPA, for all intents and purposes, IPAs are after IPAs, but you're just going to see more fragmentation into the sub-styles of Session IPA, Imperial IPA, Dark IPA, Wood-Aged IPA, and yes, I think Fruit IPA is one that's got a ton of opportunities for us all to explore. Our newest one, Flesh and Blood, comes out in about a month or so. That's basically been the lineage of April hop, Romantic Chemistry, Hellhound, with a few different fruit citrus peels, but citrus flesh as well, so that the yeast is eating the sugars from the fruit. So the fruit's woven into the taste, not just the aroma, and then dosed with blood orange juice. So we love that style, and we have for 20 years.
Awesome. Another trend, hard sodas and sparkling seltzers and
Yep.
Love it, hate it, here to stay.
We've made our beach beer, our soda for 21 years, and I remember once I sent it through a kegerator that had unfiltered wheat beer in it, and the keg fermented. And that didn't taste so good for that one. But I don't think we'll be doing. We did a show with Complex last year called "That's Odd, Let's Drink It," and we actually had discussions with big punk rock fan with Iggy Pop, and we thought maybe we'd do a fermented version of our birch beer and call it Iggy Pop, but we couldn't get the deal done. But it's cool to watch other breweries playing outside of stylistic guidelines, and I think anytime you get a drinker trying a beverage that's in the beer category that is outside the light lager juggernaut, that's not a bad thing.
Right. And I should mention that if you guys have any questions for Sam, my colleague, assistant editor Jane, sitting here in the front row, I think we can hand her a mic. Or do you have a mic? She has a mic, so we'll take a few audience questions as well. But before we do that, I want to bring it back to something I mentioned on the last panel, which was this comment from the retailer panel earlier today at the conference. And there was another comment that one of the retailers made about on-premise proliferation, thousands of brands being sold now, and I think it was actually Patrick from Buffalo Wild Wings had said, we're actually, kind of scaling back the number of taps that we have because we found that, past 30, our customers just, they can't keep track of all the beers that are on tap, and it's actually not beneficial to have so many on tap. But the larger point that they were making was just that the rotation nation has made it very difficult on consumers to understand, what beers they're getting into. Even though a lot of consumers like rotation, it's made it difficult for retailers to manage. It's made it difficult for distributors and brewers alike. I guess the question is how difficult is that for a company like Dogfish to manage? I mean, you guys have been doing essentially rotation your entire careers. I mean, that's what you've built your company on. How difficult is it now that it's become such a prominent piece of the marketplace?
Well, I think I can only speak for our brand, but I think we have learned in time, out of respect to our distributors and the fact that there's just, with 2 breweries opening every day and a finite amount of cold space at retail, tap handles at a wonderful place like this, and most constricting, frankly, square footage in the back of a distributor's truck, that you have to be respectful to that challenge. So introducing new liquids is important. It's those of us in the industry have heard that joke. You walk in to call on a great a beer grocery, and the first thing they say is, SKU proliferation. I don't have room for anything more. And what do you have that's new? Is the second thing that's out of their mouth. So I mean, we're all kind of fighting that, and I think you see great retailers. I think of someone like John Lane in Ohio at Winking Lizard. You see the great ones saying, yes, local has a place, and I'm going to give X amount of handles to local, but national crafts have a place too, because local doesn't always equate to great. And again, back to that context of quality, consistency, and well-differentiated. We hope all local breweries and all national breweries care about all 3, but oftentimes small local breweries are the ones that often get the pass in certain cities of maybe only firing on 1 or 2 of those 3 tripods.
Right.
And that in the long run doesn't do us all any good unless they have all 3. So I think you're seeing a lot more judicious use of handles and wrapped around thoughtful curation of a certain fraction of them being for the great locals, being for national, coast-to-coast brands, I'll call them, like a Dogfish, a Sierra, Firestone, and then playing with some imports and perhaps some mass lagers as well. But I kind of agree with that concept of better curation and better delineation between different styles.
So what's the brewery's role in that? I mean, how do folks in the audience here today go out and educate, or at least spread that message of, hey, this is at least what one prominent retailer thinks. Have you considered arranging your tap list like this?
Well, I mean, I think we'll get into some of that in the next panel. But I hate to be a dead horse. But the salespeople have the responsibility. The brewery has the responsibility of arming the distributor, or if they sell direct to retail, if they're self-distribution, they have the responsibility of coming up with a concise message of what makes their portfolio militant on quality, consistency, and being well-differentiated. That well-differentiated is the heart of the storytelling that gives our brands their different voices. So really being articulate with and concise with what makes your portfolio well-differentiated is the best way into that discussion.
Right. So we got 5 minutes. Does anyone out there have a question for Sam, a burning question that they want to ask him? Jane is here, has a microphone. I know somebody has to have a question out there.
Somebody over here does. Just make my way on over. Excuse me, guys.
We're getting there.
Oh, keep your hand up. Keep your hand up.
It's a big room.
There you are. All right. Want to stand up and go over you are?
Hi, Sam.
How you doing?
Good. I have a timely question. So my wife and I were coming back from dinner with my parents last night, and we had to stop halfway to our apartment to get a drink, obviously, and we picked a random bar, and we had a 60-minute and a Yards beer, and unfortunately, the bar's draft system and cleanliness rendered them both undrinkable.
Yeah.
So we left,
Yeah.
and I'm wondering, as a brewer who's passionate about quality, how do you want your reps and your distributors to handle a situation like that, where a beer or a bar wants to sell craft beer but isn't treating it the way that it probably should, so that the consumer is getting a less than ideal product?
Yeah. Were they both served in straight side pints?
Yes.
That's actually good. You wouldn't think that's good, but it is good, because those things, when you hit them against the bar, they break even, and when you try to cut the bartender with it, it's a really good cutting motion. That's my recommendation. And Wendy, who runs sales for us, has throat punched about 25 people with a broken pint glass for not cleaning their lines.
Heard it here first.
No, but let's admit it. That's always an awkward thing, because you're happy that your beer out of 4,200 made it onto that tap line, but you're also concerned that it isn't there in terms of them caring as much about what their responsibility of beer is as you did about your responsibility of beer. And the BA, Ken Grossman and John Mallett and our technical committee spent literally 8 hours in a room yesterday updating the BA's draft manual, which is available for everyone of us and our distributors and retailers to download from brewersassociation.org. And that is an amazing guideline that you can just kind of give to an account and say, it's so cool that you sell yards and you sell Dogfish. You really care about your beer. But as the beer IQ of the consumer is going up, part of that needs to be caring about your equipment too. It's a bitch to learn, but here's a really easy thing that starts with like a one-page simple overview, like you'd get when you buy a pair of headphones. That they dumb it down. Here's the 10 frequently asked questions on servicing your draft system. So that's one of the greatest resources that we as Brewers Association members have at our fingertips, and our distributors as well.
And you haven't found that bar owners are, I don't know, particularly upset when you sort of confront them on their ability to manage, what is their piece of the supply chain, essentially?
I've only had to do that myself a few times, but I've never lost a friendship over it yet. That's all I can say. I've only done it a few times.
Well, hopefully we don't lose any friendships over beer. Any other questions out there in the audience? We have one back there, I think, Jane.
Oh,
Yeah.
coming on down.
I don't need a microphone. I'm pretty loud.
He's got it.
Yes, I can.
All right. So again, a little bit more in sales is that's the end that I'm on. But we'll move it to the off-premise. That I found that, as you were saying, the consumers are getting a little bit more educated. So are those getting the jobs of the beer buyer. What do you see the role of the problems of when I walk into a bar and maybe the consumer that has rated one of your beers or somebody else's beers less than a 97, and they're like, don't even talk to me. Like, how much has that internet and that drinker that dictates, oh, I don't even want to talk about this because it's quote unquote rating is low. I mean, like, is that going to break? Where do you see some of that going? Or?
So the social media influence on beer's ability to get sold in to a retail account, correct?
Pretty much, yeah. Thanks.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean that's and I sound like a grizzled vet because we were starting. I remember Mariah 17 years ago, like, you're gonna want to do an interview with these guys. We're the #1 rated beer on Beer Advocate. I'm like, a website about beer? That's never gonna take off. And then got to meet the Allstroms. Got to meet the Allstroms, and they're two of my great friends in the industry. But of course, as a brewer grows, it becomes harder to keep those ratings up. And I think there's a great difference between beer geeks and beer snobs, and both might have the same amount of beer IQ. And a beer geek uses their powers for good to spread their love for good beer and turn each other onto it. And beer geeks use their powers for evil, to lord their knowledge over others, or to play arbiters of taste at their retailers. And you gotta navigate that. And Todd, our VP of Sales, has a great approach to it, where it's not about thinking about the channels of trade and convenience store and grocery, because it's like anyone opens a new bar today and they say, well, what's your theme of your bar? We're gonna be a craft beer bar. It's like, you mean you're going to be a bar, right? Because everyone has good craft beer now. But you can break it down sort of into 3 families from Todd's filter, which is, just getting into craft as a segment, a craft location that gets it but isn't doing the super crazy white whale shit, and then the super beer-centric, craft-centric places that are off the charts. And I think as brewers, you need to go in with a different selling platform to those 3 groups of retail, and they exist in both on and off-premise worlds. And I think that's obligation to kind of respect that level of beer IQ in each of those outlets that you go into.
Awesome response. Thorough. I'd like to see you go in and sell some beer sometime. Like, I want to go on a ride along with Sam and see you encounter some of these issues.
I do it a lot. Anytime I go to dinner, I bring a bottle of beer with me and try to get them to buy it.
Nice. Always got to be a salesman, right?
Working hard.
Okay, so we're just about out of time. One final question before we break. We can all do some networking, get some beers. We've talked a lot about bunch of different stuff, whether it was M&A, different beer trends, the social media influence on beer's ability to get sold into a bar. A lot of competition out there, rotating handles. All this, as you look out into the world of craft over the next 12 to 18 months, what's your vision of how things shake out sort of in the near term? How does the landscape continue to evolve over the next year and a half?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's ever been a better time in America to be a beer drinker or a beer brewer. And, I think there's always going to be room for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of new craft breweries in America. And anyone that I talk to that's thinking about getting into this industry, and perhaps there are those that are here today, that I do go back to that tripod. If you're quality, consistency, and well differentiated, if that's your model, come on in. We want you shoulder to shoulder with us. So I think there's going to be hundreds and hundreds of more awesome indie craft breweries in the world 2 years from now. But frankly, I'm not going to be at all surprised if the opening and closing rate starts shifting a little bit as the consumer becomes more aware of what really defines world-class craft beer, whether it's being brewed on a 3-barrel brew house in an industrial park in rural Nebraska, or it's at a $100,000, 100,000 barrel startup brewery in New York City.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, big round of applause for Sam. Thank you. He'll be back up here.
Thank you, buddy.
Thank you.
How many minutes?
So we are going to reconvene in about 10 minutes. So go fill up your pint glasses. We got an awesome panel talking about pricing strategies in about 10 minutes. So get a beer and come on back.